Hello. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be making an end table cover. So what I want, I'm going to make 8 squares in the hoop. I made one. And this is the 6x6. It's a design by SweetPea and it's called Square Quilt. And they have 4 different sizes, 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, and 7x7. I printed out the sheet that gives the sizes. But what I ended up doing, because the fabric I wanted to use, there was so very little of this and this, that I decided I would do a sample one and measure as I went, so then I would know what size to cut. And I had just enough of that and one extra of that. So I've cut it much closer than the instructions tell you, and I have to be rather careful as I'm putting the whole thing together. But I will make it work because this is what I wanted to use. I'm using a tearaway, and I had some batting for a baby quilt from a very long time ago that we discovered in the very back of the closet when we did the flooring. So I've cut these up into squares. The one thing about this pattern that I will warn you about, they don't have a placement stitch in the beginning. What it tells you to do is to take your batting and lay it in the frame. So the batting is cut bigger than necessary. And what I do is use the stitch down for the batting. And then I put these 2 layers together because my foot always tears up my batting. As you can see, I did try to do it without, and it ended up all puckered right there where it grabbed it and pulled. So I will just carefully trim around it. So if you get this, I would suggest your first stitch out. Let me try this again. If you get this pattern, I would suggest, if you have the same difficulties that I do with your batting getting caught in the foot, so you want it covered, is to do the first line stitch out and then put your batting and your fabric over it, and then you'll just have to fold the fabric over to trim closer to it if you don't want batting in your seams. The idea is to leave 1/2 inch seams all around, but because I only had X amount of fabric, I'm going to be going with smaller seams. That's my case, but I always go with smaller seams anyway, so I'm used to it. I will expect it when I'm putting it together. Alright, and since I was able to finally find that lost box, I've got my flat magnetic hoop back. And we just get this set up. I had ordered some thick oblong magnets from Amazon, and I don't know what's going on. They don't like me no more or what, because it has gotten where the 2-day shipping it should have been here last Friday, or no, I'm sorry, last Thursday. And Friday I called them. Well, it can come late. They're not even nice to me anymore. And it's like, I'm not going to give you $140 to talk nasty to me. Yeah, their rates went up to $139.99 a year for an American membership. I don't know what it is overseas, but I'm not giving it to them. They're not worth it. Every seller is also on Walmart, so, you know, whatever. I will go there. I'm sorry. Tirade done. let's get this started. One problem with magnets is they catch on the feet. And this fits very snug, because obviously it's not a Babylock or a Brother hoop, so it fits quite snug in there. And I'm going to move you over here for a minute. Okay, so this is what it looks like on your screen. Well, on my screen, I should say. And these are the colors. It has more. It keeps going. And I can't say, there's no showing you the rest. If there's a way to make that move down, I haven't figured it out. But it will start with what is actually the tack down, and I'm going to use it for placement. I don't want to pull it up into my embroidery and creation program, because if they created that in something else, you know, you have to open that file up. I would have to convert it, and it would change the stitches in it. I don't want to change the stitches. It's a beautiful design, so I will simply, this first one is box. If I want it to do it more, this is a box also, so I can use this one for my placement, and I will use this one for tack down and do 2 layers at once, because it doesn't have a third one, and that's alright. I don't really need a third one. Alright, we're going to go over here. It is not a long stitch out, 19 minutes, and then of course you have to add on for stopping and changing threads. If you're wanting to change threads, you can have a different color thread for each box. I'm using a dark navy blue. I've only got a tiny bit, so I'm going to do 2 of them with a dark navy blue on this. And then I'm going to change it to a different blue, because I have lots of other blues, but I only had that tiny spool and I'm using it up. My goal this year. Right now pink is, ooh, somebody move my thread case back. I just hit. Right now it's stitching out pink. That was the last color stitched. And I just left it in. This is the placement, and I'm not worried about it. Now remember what I said. With this design, this is actually a tack down stitch, and I'm using it as a placement. And this is the 6x6. It might be in the others, I didn't check them. I only took out the 6x6. The largest my machine will do is a 6x10. If I wanted to use larger, I have to put my Pfaff together for embroidery. So we take this. And of course I trimmed it a little close. I always trim everything too close, don't I? That's alright. I didn't want it too big, because if I don't bother to trim it down, you know. This is so pretty. I've used it in a few quilts for my son. Well, for one of them. What is it? For some reason it's making a really strange noise today. Now it's going to do that bit in the inside. Where did I set my... that go through? My eyes are so bad. It twisted around and I just want to make sure. Yeah, it's through. I'm doing the little square up at the top is just stitching. And on this one, on two of them, it's going to be in the navy blue. Now we're going to do the placement for the inner quilted square. Isn't this beautiful? I love this. I had just one small piece left of that also. I learned my lesson about, yeah, I have to peek over the back of my machine to see. I don't want to take the hoop out and bump the camera, so that's all right. We'll just peek over it. Way back when I started quilting, what the quilters would recommend was if you saw a fabric you really liked but you didn't have plans for it, buy a 1/4 yard. There is a small problem with buying that 1/4 yard. Then when you want to use it, you need more. So I did adjust that. There was a time period where I was making halfway decent money for, you know, an uneducated woman. I started buying at least a yard. If I was buying the very least, it was a 1/2 yard, because I could use it in small pieces in a quilt. But I preferred to get 1 to 2 yards, because what if I wanted it for the main draw, this type of a thing. So I've ended up with a great deal of thread. I've ended up with a great deal of fabric over the years from buying all that because I just loved it and then not using it. Now we need to trim out, and I need to change the battery. This may look upside down to you. I hope it doesn't. Okay, the magnets are grabbing my scissors. Oh, wait, nope, wrong one. Look what I was about to do. You leave the outer one because that's your seam. And as I said, I'm used to using small seams. I use 1/4 inch seams on my quilts. It's just what they called the proper way of quilting when, you know, in the 80s, the older women were, you know, that were teaching you to quilt. When I was in my 20s, the ones that controlled the quilting and how you were supposed to do it had strict rules. Now, you know, people have changed, I guess. So it's more of a, you know, I don't want to do it that way. And okay. Then it was still a society of, you listen to your elders more than you would realize. There were a great many of us that may have questioned it but didn't argue with it, and they had a lot of rules. It wasn't nearly as much fun to quilt then as it got to be in my 40s when I went, oh, bite me. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. It's sad that it took me till my 40s, and everybody always thought I was such a rebel. Not really. If you're getting glimpses of my, you know, very heavy shirt, it's because our air conditioning's on and I'm freezing. My back room, I have covered up the vent, and it is still cold in here. And I've got the door closed because I'm filming. So, back to the machine. If you put your machine on a riser, well, for one thing, it's a little easier on your back. We didn't make it too high, and I'm okay with that. For where it used to sit, it had to fit up under a cabinet on this end, so it could only go so high. I gotta have clearance. I'm not gonna be paranoid about that. And it ended, and I told him to leave the front open. Well, he enclosed the very end that's under this part, but the rest of it is open. And I had all these trays. This one was actually on my wall, and I got a little basket yesterday. I put it on the wall, and I took this one off. So now I have 4 of these little cups, and all little doodads and little spools of thread, and that end up in here. And that one's got too full. Chalk is moving. Chalk is moving. There is a brace underneath, and I have to kind of pick them up at the back end. To get it over that brace, it runs down the center, because it actually goes all the way back, but you know, I don't have 24-inch pull-outs, but there's a brace for support. Alright, now we're going to do our little quilt lines and get that in. Now I'm going to, too hard to get it out from underneath fabric, and it'll be peeking at me. This takes 3 minutes. We have to have it on. We live out by the lake. It's always cooler here. So it's funny, I go into town and I'm all dressed for out here where there's a nice breeze and it's cool, and in the house I'm freezing, and I go into town where it's all asphalt and you melt. I have way too many clothes on. People look at me strange. Old ladies, you know, they're always gotta chill. Well, yeah, if you live with 3 men, your air conditioning's on. I turned it up to 71 and about killed them. I don't know what to... Oh, stop. I don't know what to tell you. You'll just have to roast. I had 2 quilts on me last night. That's ridiculous. And yes, I am colder now than I used to be. What in the world? Come up here. We have this beautiful bright pink. And that's going to go right there. Now, I have to make sure I'm covering the back without knocking you over. I actually think this is the ideal spot for you, so I'm trying really hard to not have to move you again. Because as it is, I'll have to cut those bleeps out. I was bouncing that camera all over the place. Alright. What I did was I met the edges of my square up to the edges of the dark blue, because from the first one I know that they're all the same size, and if I do that it does cover those lines because of my first one. I know this. So even though I can't see very well around the camera to check all edges of that, I'm confident in this. Now it's going to do the inside square. Now we need to trim out for this square. Inside and 2 sides of the outside. We have to be sure to leave the outer edges for the seam. Let's move the camera. I'm going to have to break down. Well, I did order a new ceiling light that is, because they call it a track lighting. Because what my husband put in when he built the house was every bedroom. And this is, believe it or not, it's a guest room. Yeah, never got used for that. We moved in and I went, mine. I have never in my life had my own room. For real. I was one of 9. It was 2 families combined. I mean, there was one point in time when there were so many of us that, so many of the kids at home, and the house we were living in didn't have enough bedrooms. Alright, these are very pointed, and I can get it just under. You gotta be careful. You only want the one fabric. And I just slide it through. These are so sharp that a lot of the time I can just slide them. Ooh, thread. So we gotta trim that inside out, just like we did everything else. Let's see. There's not much left, but it actually is a great deal of stitching. Now I had changed to the pink. If you can use the same color for all of it, it's going to outline this box. So I need to change back to my blue for that. I just have so little of it, I didn't want to waste any of it. So I switched back and forth. For the tack down on this fabric, you could just keep using the same, like the blue. I just didn't want to take a chance of running out so close to the end. I would rather have just a hair left that I can't use for anything than to run out and not be able to finish the square. And I think this will leave me enough. So first it's going to do the satin stitch around the edge of this one. Then I will change thread colors and it will do the satin stitch on 2 sides of this and all around the inside. Alright? And that is it. Yeah, this one is finished. I'm going to be taking all the sound out from this last stitch out section because I was sneezing so the whole time. I'm going to start sneezing again in a second. I've got a sinus infection and it's starting to break loose. So as you can see, it does not put satin stitches at the seam line. All of these will be seamed together, and then when I get them all done, I'm also going to film that part, so you'll see me creating my end table cover. It's just a table runner, just a specific size so it'll fit on the top of my table, because my cats are run across it and I saw some little scratches. I've got a scratch across my cheek. He ran across me this morning. Actually, he came for loving. He's a very loving cat. And he came up and was nudging me and wanted me to pet. And he's purring and I'm petting. And all of a sudden, the other cat walked by and he went and caught me with one nail. So this, at this point, is done. I will tear off all this. Pull out as much as I can in the back. I'm not too terribly worried about it because it kind of dissolves in the wash over time and it's just going to sit on top of a table. It's not a quilt. If it was a quilt, you wouldn't want that rattly, crinkly sounding inside, but on top of the little end table, it's not going to get moved except when it's washed. So, 6 more to go, and then we can make our tabletop. They're all pressed and ready to be sewn together. I didn't square them down. I didn't trim them. I'm just going to match up the seam lines. But you got to make sure you've got it in the layout you want. And this is what I decided to do, because I didn't like those two together. And on this side, I decided exactly the same. And now I'm going to fold them like this, and this is the seam I will sew on each stack, and I'm going to stagger them a specific way. Another thing we can do better yet, so if I get distracted or called away, you know, to start dinner or something like that, I can come back and still know exactly where I was at. Believe me, that does happen. It has been a while since I did these first stitch outs. Well, we had to make a cheesecake. I should have filmed that, but there was too much noise going on. There's always so much noise. It's hard to film anything. You know, I'm sure that everyone is home today, so I'm sure I'll end up having to cut the sound out of a good portion of this. So now we know exactly which end to sew together. And I'm going to sit down at the sewing machine and get those sewn together. I can see the seam on this side, and I'm trying to make sure I get them matched up on the inside. You can trim it down closer and then give yourself so much of a seam allowance. The pattern calls for like a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and but it's going to pull, so it's still going to be crooked. You're going to have it on what you think is perfectly even, and as you can, if you look real close, you can see that I've got less here than I've got here. It happens. So I'm going to match up my sew lines and then run. There's a mark on my foot, a tiny little red line, and I'm trying to run that right down that seam. There we go. And now, after I get them all done, I will press this open, and then we'll sew those seams. It sounds like a lot and sounds complicated, but it really isn't once you sit down and start doing it. If you do, like, see how I've got pink on some of these and blue on the others? Yes, the blue blends in, so if it creeps outside of my seam, it won't show up as well. But I will tell you that it's much harder to match those lines up. The pink I can see so well for matching up, so I think when I do the others, which I've got other patterns that I want to stitch out for that, and I might film those also, just because they're different quilt patterns from the same company, so you can see them. I know I like doing that before I buy something that's I'm going to be stitching out. I like to watch somebody else stitch it out so I can get an idea if it's going to be a problem on a flatbed, that kind of a thing. Some things just are hard to do on a flatbed. You can do hats on it, and some people have no problem, but boy, I am not the greatest at it. So I tried to do one for a nephew way back when I first started, and about tore up the machine I had then. And I never tried another one. Now, we again want to make sure we've got it back to being lined up the way we want it. So, it'll be those two and those two, and then it'll be these two. So we're going to do that 2 more times. Now I went ahead and I pinned this into place because it's a longer seam. And again, I'm following that seam line that it made so that I'm just on the other side of it. And there's one block. Okay, there's my top. These squares were the 6 by 6. Alright, 24 3/8. It's not actually pressed flat, so 24 1/2 is my length. My width, though, the tabletop is 15 by 24. So I've got enough length, but I don't have nearly enough width. By the time I take off from the seam line to seam line is 12 inches on the nose. And I need it to be 3 inches wider. So I can go ahead and just make it a little longer. I have already. So what I did was, this was a leftover from a quilt I had done at one point, and I saved those, especially when it was like 3 chunks of it. And if I cut it in half, if I fold it in half, that's 2.5 inches, and I'm going to lose some on either side. That should be about enough. And what I have decided I'm going to do is, for the instead of using some more batting on the side, I put a lightweight iron-on interfacing on it, and I will sew it in strips. I'm not doing the miter corner and all that stuff. And then I'll iron it over. That'll give it even more thickness. And then the backing, I'm going to sew on it like a pillowcase up the sides, and then just turn it inside out. And that'll add more stability to that. And it'll just be a top border. It's not going to be a binding. That gives it quite a bit of strength. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm not cutting it off until it's sewn into place. The trick is to keep that folded evenly, because I don't want it twisting afterwards. I can no longer see my seam line, so I'm going to have to cut straight lines. Now what I did was I went by the stitch line, and then I made sure it was squared up, so you can see that in spots it's in a little more than in others because of the way the individual squares went together. But I want to make sure that those are covered up, so I decided to use that. I would rather lose a little bit more than to get done and have pink stitching showing on a navy blue. I'm going to butt this right up against that. That pin is mostly to keep it from unfolding. If you've watched more than this of my sewing videos, you know I'm horrible about pinning. If you decide you're wanting to do, I'm going to do both long pieces and then this one, for control's sake, and I know I have extra, go past it some. You always have to have that safety margin, right? You don't want to take off too much. Come on. While I've got my sewing machine moved back, I will go ahead and get both sides pinned into place. I'm going past that end just slightly. I can square it up afterwards. I started giving myself fake nails. I have a condition, and I think it's nerve damage. They've given me all kinds of they've told me different things, but I itch. I always feel like bugs are crawling on me someplace. Right now, my face, oh my God. Sorry. Saying it out loud made it worse. So, sharp fingernails, in your sleep, you will tear the skin off. Not good. So, even though I've never really been one to mess with my nails, of course, I have nothing else to do right now anyways. I mean, can't work, so kind of gives me something to do, but I give myself fake nails. Well, I went in and I had them done, but I've got this one, these two fingers were caught in a car door when I was a child, and they didn't remove it at the emergency room. They didn't take that nail out, and it ended up really deep ridges. It's just a mess. So when I get artificial nails, they don't always stay a long time anyways. And this young woman is really sweet. She was so very new. She didn't even have business cards yet. So I wrote her number down on a piece of paper. How's that? And stuck it in my wallet. That nail came off very quickly. I had used Mother's Day gift money. They never know what to get me. You just get whatever you want anyways. That's cool. So for a Mother's Day gift to myself, I went and got nails. So I ordered this stuff online because I couldn't afford to go back right away. And I have to constantly redo them because I do not, you know, I am not a girly girl. I bang these nails and they're in water all the time for washing dishes. Lord, I tested out a new food processor yesterday. Boy, I was so disappointed. Literally a manufacturing flaw, a design flaw. It doesn't turn on. The safety catches, you know how you have to get everything locked into place just right, or it won't turn on. So this little knobby has to be, you know, where the handle is, has to be turned all the way over to push this lever in. And there's a knob on the bottom on the inside of the bowl that presses one on this side. Except it doesn't. It goes past it about 1/4 of an inch. And we fussed and fussed and fussed, and finally my son jumped on the line because I kept thinking I was doing something wrong. I got the instructions out. I'm doing everything it says to do. And found a website for repairing, someone that repairs them all the time. And he said that it was literally a design flaw in the machine. There's nothing you can do about it. So I have to send that back. I have to do a return. And it's sad because I spent way past my budget to get it so it would last forever. Because the one I've got now is a Braun and I've had it for 30 years, and the only reason I have to give it up is besides the blades have dulled. The bowl got put on the bottom rack in the dishwasher somehow at some point. I don't always do the dishes myself. I get help, which is greatly appreciated, but I've been fighting with it for about a year. I mean, you can get it on, but you really struggle to get it on and off because it warped just slightly, plus it was cracking from age anyways. It's plastic, what do you expect? God, Braun makes a good machine. And it's funny, I bought that. I had to take my mixer in to be fixed. I got the spatula, I was scraping the bowl with it running. Always a mistake. Lord, this must have been in, I think it was before Alex was born. So, like 88. Because I did an absolute no-no. When I found a place, it was actually in another state. We live rather close to Ohio. It was closer to go to an appliance repair. You used to have your appliances repaired, even small appliances. You didn't run out and get new. I did on toasters. That was ridiculous. I could get a toaster for $5. But that mixer was a lot more than that. My first stand-up mixer. Anyhow, I took it in to get it fixed. And someone had taken that Braun in to get fixed. I forget what he said. They had done something in it and it messed something up. And then they didn't want to pay how much it was going to cost to get it back. So in '88, $100 was a lot of money. I thought my husband was going to be so mad at me. I spent $100 on that. He sold it to me for $100. And I have never regretted it. Never regretted it. Nowadays, $100, people throw that away on nothing, but, you know, buy lottery tickets for $100. But to me, it's still a lot of money. I don't know what to tell you. I went online, tried to find another bowl for it, and then realized that there was a problem. The blades were dull. So I tried sharpening myself. And it did sharpen a little bit. They'll never be as good as they were, though. That's just not going to happen. So this, what's it called? Framed. This type is called framing, I believe. And the other, where you miter it, you fold it up and down and back and forth and turn it and that kind of thing. And I am just not that good at mitering. My binding, I've got down, I can do that, no problem. But when it comes to something like this, where it's just going to be laying on top, not folding underneath, it doesn't lay flat when I get done. And since I know that I have a difficult time, why drive myself nuts? It's not that big a deal. We will simply do it this way. I love these kind. They're so easy on your hand. I have a few different ones. I have one pair that I bought quite inexpensively, and I use them for paper and such. And then that was actually, those were to replace my original pair. Let me show you my original pair. This is my original ones. Look at how there used to be a label there. Yes, I do not touch. They are old. So grab yourself little bowls or whatever. I made myself a little box so that you can kind of throw your pins. I do have a magnetic thing, and I've got stuff stuck on it, but I end up not using it for the pins. And I put a magnet right there. I'm not telling you to put a magnet on your machine. If it gets too close to your brain, not your brain, its brain, it could nuke it if it's a strong enough magnet. I mean, if you ever decide you want to do bad things on your computer and you don't want to get caught and somebody pulls in your driveway to raid you, if you've got a high-powered magnet, just go whap to the side with a hard drive on it, and it should wipe it out. But personally, I wouldn't give it a shot, but I'm not going to do something. You're not going to find that kind of stuff on my computer anyways. And it doesn't have to do with being an older person. It just has to do with the fact that I'm not that kind of person. I did tell my doctor that if they ever give me a death sentence, they tell me that, you know, you got 2 months to live or something. I'm going to start smoking again. I am bad enough to do that. I will stop at the store on the way home. I told him flat out, there's one thing I miss in life that I have given up. It is my cigarettes. It's not cool anymore. Really, it wasn't cool before. Both my parents smoked, so half my siblings ended up with the habit. Actually, let's think about it. Out of 9, only 2 never smoked. And Gene gave it up years ago. My brother, he stopped smoking years ago. And I gave it up a couple of years ago. I had gone to vaping and then I quit vaping. And I still have a piece left. Has a seam in it, but I have a piece. We will save that. I have a bucket down here I can put it in. If I can reach it. I still have to decide what I am using for the back. I think I'll just slap on that. I've got a chunk of gray fabric sitting over there. I'll press this all down and measure that to size. Measure this and then measure that to size. We will sew that on. You do not want fabric pulling as you sew anytime. So don't leave it hanging off the edge of something. If it's piled in your lap, just keep making sure you bunch some up around it. You don't want the weight of it pulling. It'll distort it. Now, see, that's what I mean. Now you can make it a little more interesting by doing one side, then the other, and then the other, and each lap will be, you know, look like it's running around the edge. But sides and then top and bottoms, that's the, I think, the standard way. I'm going to tell you, this machine automatically drops its foot. You can set it up so that it does the back stitch automatically. And when I get to the end, when I get close to the end, if I just hit that reverse stitch one time, it'll do a finish off, tie off, cut it, and raise the foot. I've gotten so spoiled with this machine. It is not a top-of-the-line fob. So you don't have to get the absolute top of the line to get some of those features. This is a Creative 4.5. They do still make them. I found this one refurbished. It's been a couple of years ago, but I got a great deal on it. It costs a lot more now because everything's gone up. So I'll just square out my corners, give it another pressing, get my backing, and we will get that sewn on. The battery's getting low, so we're going to have to pause here, and I will pick it back up when I've got everything ready to all ironed into place, measured, cut down. I clipped it on. Well, the reason I do two different things is so that when I come around and hit that pin, I know to stop. I need the gap to turn it inside out. It ended up getting quite warm in here. I had to stop and charge the battery and tie my hair up. This weekend it's only supposed to be in the 70s, and it is only in the 70s. I had my husband take the ceiling fan out with that lame light fixture it had, and I bought this new light fixture, and oh man, it is bright in here and I love it. Hopefully it helps with the videos. But, and I kept saying, well, I never use the fan anyways. Yeah. I didn't have the window open. No fan to turn on. Whoa. And I was sweltering. Okay. I do that a lot, don't I? Okay. I just leave enough so that I can get those fingers in there. We do want to cut close on our corners. Not too close. Don't care if it's that sharp of a point. I would rather it didn't pull out when I was turning it. I did not change my thread to sew all this together. So it still has the off-white in it. I think it's off-white. Or white. Whatever. I normally use off-white for everything. Oh. Get my hand in there. Ah! I lost enough weight that I can get my ring back on my finger. The ring I've been wearing, I call my fat ring. I bought it when my second son was born. He was in the NICU. He didn't come home till he was 10 days old. He was certainly big enough. They loved it. He was a huge baby. He was 8 pounds 4 ounces. And they had all these little preemies, and so they could hold him and not worry, and they held him all the time. But he struggled to breathe. He had too much fluid in his lungs, and was a planned C-section. I had to have C-section because I have a tumor on my pituitary gland. Anyhow, I did succeed in birthing 2 children, but both had to be C-sections. I could not go into labor. It could kill me, blah, blah, blah. Everything can kill you, but anyhow, Alex didn't expel. I did go into labor with Nick. He came early. But Alex, the doctor was going out of the country, and I didn't want a strange doctor since I was high risk. So we figured, pretty close to term, but I did not go into labor. He was certainly big enough to be born, but didn't expel all the fluid out of his lungs. That's what happens when during the contractions. It helps force the fluid out of the lungs as they're coming through the birth canal. They expel the rest. Learned all this after he was born. But I smoked, and I didn't want anyone smoking around him. And of course, my husband, he'd just come home and go outside. No problem. So I was with the children all day, every day. And it would be late at night before I could even have a cigarette. And by then, it would give me a horrible headache. And one night I said, that's it. I'm not smoking anymore. And I quit smoking. And for the first time since my, teenage years, I had a weight problem. Well, I was never slim again after that. And I went back to smoking. I quit for 22 months. Neither one of my children had an ear infection the whole time. I went back to smoking. And they went back to ear infections. Nick had so many ear infections when he was 2 that he ended up with a speech impediment. Apparently, smoking was really affecting my children. But anyhow, long story short, I had put on so much weight that my ring wouldn't fit. When I got married, I was very, very tiny, very slim. So this is not my original. This was my 25th wedding anniversary set. My husband got me that. I had a tiny little band. I'm not one for rings. I'm not one for jewelry at all. So I wanted this very thin band that would just sort of disappear, and I never had to worry about snagging. We used to wear pantyhose, my hose or anything. You had to wear them for work. They made us wear dresses. Almost every job I had when I was young. Really, really short dresses, too. They think they got it so bad now. Oh, well. Anyhow. So I went out and I bought myself a big fat wedding band. And I called it my fat ring. Well, after I hurt my back, I did finally quit nicotine. I had gone to vaping, but still I vaped. And you do that instead of eating. I wasn't tiny, but I wasn't obese. I'm supposed to say that. This is going to have to be pressed into place, and then we will change out our thread and do our top stitching. But anyhow, I kept it around, and when I hurt my back and I quit smoking permanently, I cannot see me going back to smoking. I put on a great deal of weight. Couldn't exercise to get it off. I tried, and it just made me hurt so bad with the bulging disc. So instead, I've spent the last 2 years adjusting slowly. They say it takes 2 years for your body to adjust, and you can keep those bad eating habits, but I had other physical ailments attack me, which actually started me on the road to losing weight. And I took that opportunity to change my diet. Kind of had to, trying to figure out how to make that stuff stop and help myself. So I'm still slowly losing weight. And the fat ring would just slide up and down. And I went, I bet I can get it on. And I can get it on, but when it's hot, my hands always swell and it gets tight. So I know I've lost weight. Now I'm going to press this and I'll be back. Changed out my bobbin to something that'll blend in this. It's actually a light gray. On the top, I have put a pink. First thing I'm going to do is edge stitch the whole thing. You have a setting on your machine where you can have it, usually it'll be a button up in this area, and it shows a needle, a line, and the needle head is just below it. That is a needle down position. Turn it on, and when you come to a corner, you don't have to worry about it accidentally going to, pulling it past or something. Just drop your needle down and keep on going. Now, way back when I started, you always held your strings, your threads, you held them off to one side. Now, they don't seem to do that, and it knots up underneath, and I don't like that. Because I don't have my corners pushed out real tight, I am sewing literally for that. If you finish it in that way, you kind of go around the corner, it makes it look like that's what you wanted. You wanted a rounded corner. Throughout, I mean, that's a pretty decent corner, but still. And if you prefer to round your corners, when you're sewing it together, just sew, just slowly turn it instead of going and then a straight turn. Instead of a 90-degree turn, you'll just kind of curve around it. You can cut it that way too. Just take anything round. Anything round. A can. Draw a line, cut around it. Someplace in this back room was a plate. Didn't match the other stuff, and I kept it back here literally for rounding corners of quilts. I never start on the corner. I start below it. And then I cross the path. So that you've got a good lockdown. They have gone across each other for a couple of inches here. Alright. Now, I'm going to try to get that in the ditch. Now, what I was talking about earlier, you would hold this, and see if I can get it right in there. See, the problem is that you want just one stitch, so that you can pull that thread up. See? And this electronic machine drops multiple stitches at once, so not a big deal. Now the idea is to keep this seam lined up with that split in my foot. The reason I love this foot is because it has markings and all this stuff. I can see a thread. As bad as my eyes are, I can see there. Got it. And try to keep that stitching right into the ditch there, because it wasn't quilted. These weren't made with a backing underneath it. So at this point it's just loose. And we want to secure it at least a little. I was going to go through every line, but I don't think I will because I'm using pink and I don't want the pink showing on the blue. And I just don't feel like changing the thread again. This will work. This will keep it secure. If it was a bed pillow, well, that made sense. If it was a bed quilt, that would be different. you'd need as much quilting as possible on it. But it isn't. It's just going to sit there on a table and hopefully prevent any more scratches. I had 3 of these end tables, and when we rearranged, well, when he put down the floor, we also rearranged the living room. And one of them ended up under the window in the eating area, and the cats loved sitting on it and looking out the window. So nobody wanted to put it back in the living room. I did, but they didn't. So it is all scratched up. And I gave it to my son to take to his room. I decided I wasn't going to shove it in the living room. There's so much junk in that living room now. There's almost always a basket. Well, there is always a basket of laundry on the couch. To stay accurate, you're better off to sew slower. I gotta get that. I cannot sew with my slippers or flip-flops on. In the winter, you wear an enclosed shoe, and I can... Oh, went 1 stitch too far. There we go. The faster you go, the more likely you are to waver on that line. And if your eye is watching the needle, you actually have a harder time getting it to go into the path you want it. You're better off to watch at a point in front of the needle so that you hold the fabric more steady. Try it sometime, see how you like it. Watch its path, not its stitch. Every time my eye wanders to that needle, I end up going off because my hands shift more than... So if I stitch through all of those quilts, it would hold this all together real well. But since it's just going to lay on top of a table, it won't matter. That fabric shouldn't have That fabric shouldn't have pull on it. So there is my topper. I like that pattern. I do like that. Definitely easier to do this in the embroidery machine than to do it in a quilt, you know, with piecing. Because Each section of it, basically, you're talking a matter of mini squares sewn together. There would be seams all over it. This is appliqued right on top of it. And of course you could applique your whole quilt that way, but I loved the design, but don't have the patience for the piecing, so I wanted to try this. And I do have 2 more to try. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are also. If you've hung in this far, thank you very much for sticking with me. And I hope to see you next time. This pattern will be, I will have a link down below. It's a SweetPea pattern.